Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Black Scientists Cooperative. Today, we have two very special guests with us this afternoon, and we will be talking about the connections between space science and health and life here on Earth. And so, to help us make sense out of all of this, we have today Jordan Lewis and Janiyah Griffin, who are going to help us think about how space exploration is really connected to all the things that we do here, right here on Earth. So, first, ladies, it is a pleasure to have you here and welcome to our podcast. And thank you for taking the time to come and chat with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
So, first off, we want you to really just introduce yourself to our viewers and just tell them a little bit about yourselves and how you really got into space science and exploration.
I'll go ahead and start off first, Janae, if you don't mind. So I'm Jordan Lewis, as Lethea mentioned. I am the project coordinator and diversity program lead for Trish. Trish is actually my first job out of undergrad. So I was a grad from Rice University in Houston, Texas. I majored in English and business. And so I just kind of stumbled across Trish because I needed a job, and actually I found out about it through the English department, and of course, space just sounded so interesting, um, and it was just an entry level role for me that I thought could be really interesting. And I met the team. I met Catherine Domingo, who was my supervisor when I first got on. And she, just told me about Trish's mission to fund really innovative research and for space for NASA in particularly. So it sounded like a really great fit. And it was also based in Houston. So if you don't know, Rice University is in the medical center or near the medical center. So I was already kind of familiar with that area and already really liked it. And so I actually, when I started Trish, I was 7 minutes away from the apartment I was staying in while I was in undergrad. So my commute was amazing for that first couple of months. But yeah, I think it was just kind of the familiarity, and I have obviously had a hard time leaving Houston. And so it just drew me to it, but we do really cool stuff, and it was a position that was always changing, and that was something that they really harped on when I was interviewing. And it's something that in terms of like my daily work is different all the time. We're always chasing after new exciting initiatives and funding really cool projects. So that's what really attracted me into space. And I was really I've actually, this is my last week at church, so it's funny I'm talking about it, in present, but also kind of retroactively. My time here has been really shaped by I think being able to bring my contributions as somebody who's not from a scientific background, who did do a lot of studying in like minority disparities that exist for minorities in the United States. It was a really cool way to fit in all of my background with business and English, and my writing skills for research with this position. So that's what drew me to space research. And through my work that I've done with the diversity program, I met Janiyah, and she can, tell you about how we met.
Yeah, so my journey, I guess, into space started. I kind of just stumbled into it as well. It wasn't something I grew up like, oh, I want to work at NASA and I want to, So I worked at NASA for about 8.5 years. My background is originally in chemistry and forensic chemistry, and I have a degree in criminal justice. So I was on the track for crime scene investigation, not working at NASA. And just decided that, I wanted something more. I didn't know what that looked like. But the dean of my college was the one that actually, pushed me into getting into this program. So I graduated from Grambling State University in Louisiana, double majored, and then ended up going to California State University, San Bernardino. They had a program there called the Integrated Technology Transfer Network. So I learned about all things tech, all things federal labs, business development. They took STEM students from HBCUs, brought us to California, and then taught us the business side of things so that we could, understand the technical details or the scientist language, but then we could translate that into a value proposition that business people would be able to understand. So my sweet spot is taking people's ideas, especially even if they're technical or scientific, and then selling them essentially. And so once I figured out that I could utilize my background and everything that I knew, my experiences, what I love to do with problem solving and establishing connections, and I could take that into another field, I was just like, I want to do tech transfer. And so that's what I did for 8.5 years. And if you're not familiar with tech transfer, the government spends $150 billion every year on research and development that come from taxpayer dollars. Out of that development come inventions or innovative ideas. And people like me would take those, we would work with patent attorneys, and then we would go out and we would license these patents to businesses so that they could turn these ideas into practical applications that we use every single day. And so that was really interesting for me. My last day at NASA was April 30th of 2020. No, 2021, sorry, 2021. And after that, I ended up getting a contract with Trish. So
I was gonna say, oh my God, it's been that long already.
It has been a while. Yeah, almost a year. And they were looking for someone to really help them figure out how they could get more awareness around Trish in historically excluded communities. And so we, came up with the idea to say, hey, why don't we just ask them, right? Let's ask them how they want to be marketed to, like, what are some of the things that they need or they may be missing. And we did that. So we conducted a study, we created an instrument, doing a mixed method study where we surveyed people and then also interviewed them. And so that came out fantastic. We were able to really identify a lot of the barriers that existed for people of color as it pertained to them getting funding for their research. So now we're working on a manuscript, and we'll be pushing all of our insights and findings out very soon. That's my kind of navigation into the space sector.
Janelle, that's actually a great story. For our viewers that are students, it'd be nice to just kind of share how the tech transfer office is probably closer than they think. Most major universities have a tech transfer office, and maybe if you could explain how that works into the day-to-day life of an undergraduate or a graduate student.
Yeah, so actually in 2008, there was a memorandum that came out from the White House and the president at the time that mandated technology commercialization and the advancement of technologies and IP that were coming out of institutions that receive federal funding. And so most institutions that are universities receive federal funding. So essentially, they're all mandated to do technology transfer. Now, some may not do it as well as others, but that does not mean that there is not technology transfer going on at your specific university. So a lot of the things, and one of the main things that I do now is taking the knowledge that I gained at NASA and the networks that I've gained and really work with HBCUs and minority serving institutions to teach them how to set up their own tech transfer offices. So that they can take that IP, leverage it in ways where they don't necessarily have to be dependent on state funding or different things like that. But in terms of students and faculty, right, there's a lot of IP that is generated at institutions, at universities that have helped the world. And typically a lot of the IP that comes out of that is generated either from faculty, from staff, or from collaborations with private industry. And so there are many students that have played a role in some of the largest innovations here today. I will say Google, right? So if we think about how Google was created, they got a government grant from I forget if it was like I want to say it might have been like NSA, but they were working on some intelligence around the internet and what was going on with, like, cyber threats were a really big thing, but people were kind of like, grouping together, and they were trying to figure out what that looked like. So they got a government grant. These are students at Stanford. There's IP that was created. So that algorithm that Google uses now, that we use every single day, was generated. And then from that, they decided that they wanted to license that algorithm from the university. So whatever is essentially created on the campus by university, if you're using university resources, the university has some type of ownership in it. Typically, you can look at the policies to see, like, if the student will own it, or if the faculty will own it, or if it's a joint ownership. It really just depends. But I always focus on going to the policy first. But out of that, that is how Google actually was created. So they did a spin-off company, or and licensed that technology from Stanford. And universities across the country are doing this everywhere, in terms of a lot of the startups that we're seeing.
Got it. So both of you mentioned Trish and NASA. So can you help our viewers understand what Trish is and how it's connected to NASA?
Yeah.
You want to take that, Jordan? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So Trish stands for the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. We are a grant institution that is awarded through the Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston, Texas. That's located in the Texas Medical Center. And it's from NASA. And our specific part of NASA that we function under is the Human Research Program. So this is the part of NASA that deals with health and the actual human that's on board spacecraft. So not the rocketing engineering portion of NASA. So that's our connection to NASA. So yeah, we are federally funded, taxpayer dollars, but we are a grant and we give grants. So we're about a small team of about 20 something of us total at Trish. And so we don't do any research in-house. All the research is funded. We have a bunch of different programs that we fund our research through. One of those is the diversity program. We also have an industry program. We have our larger scientific grants that we do as well. And we have a postdoctoral fellowship program that's under our education and outreach branch of our institute. We also have smaller grant opportunities that we do through, like, more ad hoc or just throughout the year. We have our Running Catalyst program, which is really just for any solicitation, or sorry, any proposals that can come in throughout the year that may not be geared towards a specific solicitation. And we award that based on what our budget looks like at the time. And so yeah, that's pretty much, we have a bunch of different funding mechanisms, and we are really involved with a lot of different organizations. We do conferences. We attend a yearly investigators workshop with our branch of NASA, the Human Research Program, and we get to workshop with a lot of other investigators through the Human Research Program. So we've got a lot going on all the time.
Absolutely. So knowing that you are a grant and you provide grants, how does that all connect? So how are we connecting the healthcare, the space exploration, to life and Earth, being that all of this is kind of centrally and centralized through NASA?
Well, that's a big question. So the connection that we have is, like, again, like, we fund all the research that we do. So we have a lot of technology that we fund. That's, what Janaea is really familiar with. And like she mentioned, there's a big push right now for the commercialization and technologies in relation to the space economy. And, like, as we're seeing more people go into space that are not just the typical astronauts who have been there before. So people that are super healthy, super highly trained. Now we're seeing more spaceflight participants because of commercial spaceflight. And so there's a natural tie in there with medical technologies and just a commercialization effort for the research that we fund. So again, that's, into our industry program. We're also Trish has recently been more involved in the commercial spaceflight sector. So we've had a few of our projects flown on the Inspiration 4 mission from SpaceX, and we've also done space adventures. We have a bunch of different providers that we're in contact with and planning to do more research in the future. So I think the biggest value, or one of the biggest takeaways from those projects, is that we have now a need to have research that's applicable to all types of different people in a way that we never had it before. And so that fits in also with us thinking about, like, how do we make it applicable to people on Earth, right? Because most of us have very different issues than, the traditional astronaut had. And so, yeah, it's a real push, and it makes it more relevant for Earth than it ever has been before. We have some of our projects include like things that work like ophthalmic devices. So we have projects that that work to help improve the eyesight of astronauts on space, because we've noticed that over long duration space missions, their eyesight tends to worsen. And so we have a device that's like a miniaturized ophthalmic device that is able to track differences in eyesight and assess the health of the eye. And so we actually have, through Trish funding, there's a device that is actually more precise than what you would get going into your regular eye doctor visit. And so that kind of thing is something that obviously has value on Earth for commercialization and applicability to our health and our daily lives. And that's just one example of a ton that we have. Janaea, she's always very enthusiastic about the space economy and what the commercialization and this looks like for the future of space and life on Earth. So feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me, and so I wasn't really involved in the politics of space until I left and decided, I wanted to be a full-time entrepreneur. And so I wanted to learn about like what was going on, the landscape, who the movers and the shakers, who's doing what, and really understanding what policies are in place, how people even understand tech transfer or how space actually impacts their lives. And what I typically like to tell people is you touch space probably 10 times before you leave your home. And it is, there's so many different products that we use that have helped us to live easier lives, have created more resources for us, more resourcefulness, so that we don't necessarily have to do things ourselves. And I think we tend to take it for granted just because we just don't know. There's a lack of knowledge around that. And I think that there have been many pushes by NASA, by other federal labs to really get the public to understand like how taxpayer dollars are being used to fund research, to further advance innovation, and then to really to have that that cycle come back, to see that ecosystem and how it works for us. So there's a lot of different things that we use every single day, from if we're looking in the medical industry, x-rays, right? That came from NASA. There's the advanced MRI technology. So superconductors actually help MRIs become more cheaper. There are prosthetic legs. There are just so many different things, braces, translucent braces, that all of this stuff has really come from the research and development that has come out of these labs. And I think, we just use this stuff. Oh, that's cool. This is a great new technology. It's going to help us advance. It's going to help straighten my teeth faster. It's going to, and so we don't really know where it's coming from, but we just know it's there for us to use. And so I think that has really been one of the, I'd say, downfalls of the space program in general, is just really communicating and bridging that gap of information and knowledge so that people will understand how space is actually impacting their life.
Y'all need a publicist. That's what it sounds like.
Well, they have a publicist.
If my braces and my MRIs and everything else is coming from space, I need to know that.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it to kind of add on to that is like space creates a natural analog where it's like there's like this pressure, right? Because the research can be performed in a way that it can't be on Earth. So there's all these different constraints that don't exist on Earth that pushes the technology, pushes the research, pushes these the data that we're collecting to be more applicable to solve whatever problem it's seeking to solve. And it exists in a way that is free of certain confines that it may have on space. I mean, on Earth.
I mean,
Which is
this for
why it's
me,
so important. Sorry.
oh no, it's okay. I was just gonna say this for me is so interesting, but very alarming all at the same time, in that it just the thought of all the innovation that comes out of the space research, and then just the likelihood that the lack of diversity you probably see, and the lack of exposure that minority communities have, and visibility to all of this. I mean, even myself, I'm a scientist. I had no idea that this level of innovation was coming out of space research. And so, just to kind of connect the dots for our viewers, this is extremely important for us to, get more involved, get more exposure, get into these programs for our researcher friends, pursue this funding opportunities, and think about ways in which you can involve your labs to touch on some of these subjects, because it's the difference between being in the front end, on the front end of innovation, or in the middle, or lagging in,
Absolutely. And with Trish, like we fund a lot of different areas because of our intersection with space and health. So it allows us to fund areas of like I've talked about the technology already, but when we respond to risks that NASA already has. So I did mention earlier when we were talking about how Trish was created, we are tasked with being innovative and funding that groundbreaking research for NASA in a way that they aren't usually able to do, because they typically fund more incremental and very like risk averse work that's very safe because they have their safety protocols. And so we exist so that we can kind of go beyond that and try to find that groundbreaking research that may be helpful further in the future, and just think outside the box. So we respond to their risks, but we kind of cover a wide gamut of health for humans. So mental health, cognitive behavior, behavioral health, and also looking at team dynamics with people being in isolation with in a very confined space with a small team that they're seeing for a long time. Like, how does that affect your emotional, mental well-being? So we fund, research within those areas, but it also touches like bone and muscle atrophy because of the microgravity effects. So there's like a lot of ties in, and there's radiation effects, which is, it's created environmentally, but that has effect on your body. So that's health. And then food, like what do astronauts eat, or people in space, what do they eat? And like, how do we think about making efficient nutrition choices for them? So it's a lot of different areas that you probably don't just naturally think of when you think of health, but we have projects in a lot of different that touch health in a lot of different ways.
So I'm hearing, all of these different, aspects of how life and the human bodies are affected by the space environment in and of itself. So I want to kind of stretch this a little, and ask, what career options and opportunities are there in space science? Because honestly, when you're talking, I hear orthodontia, I hear, nutritionists, I hear engineering, so can you expound on what some career opportunities that are available for space science? Because I mean, I see the sky as being the limit at this point.
Yeah. And beyond, right? I think for us, like, so there's two different kind of ways I think about it. Like when we're talking about space economy and like building this society that will exist in space or on Mars or wherever in the future, I think that has a much more like industrial focus just naturally, right? Because we're thinking about how we're going to build out the society, and in response to what you're saying about like having orthodontic specialists and things like that. It's kind of geared more towards that. And just full disclosure, my space relation is fully based in Trish. So like everything that I will relate to is, more so in the nature of grant funding and like how the kind of groups that we target and how we try to expand beyond just, okay, here's an academic researcher doing space research work. Like we try to target people that are technologists or in the industry, doing like, we have people that have done work in for the FDA. We have people that have done work for various institutes, kind of like the research grant giving institutes like ours, like maybe NSF and NIH. We have connections through there. And then of course, like HBCUs, we've been getting more tied in with those, particularly medical centers at HBCUs and other colleges, or other MSIs, HSIs, and TCUs. And so for us, it's more, we kind of, for us at Trish, we take the approach of like, okay, what solicitations do we have out, which, usually our solicitations focus on one particular research area. For example, autonomous medical devices, right? So then we're targeting, okay, who are the people that would be in that space? Yeah, we're looking at med centers. We're looking at medical device technology experts. We're looking at accelerators and smart startup companies that are doing med tech. And from there, we kind of grow out and target people specifically that way. But it's still a research focused aim for us. And then of course, like, you got people like me who work in space and like would do the administrative things, do the work of the operational tasks. And my colleague Rachel, who's here for moral support, she's on the communication side. So there's our publicist of like getting the message out to people. So just like any other field, it's like there's a lot of different ways you can plug yourself in, but it's a matter of like thinking outside the box and, really just going for different roles and networking with different people who would be able to plug you in.
So one thing I will add on to what Jordan is saying is, and just even going from my background and my experience. So I started as chemistry, and then I ended up working in like marketing and branding and business development, economic development, and that has nothing to do with my degree. But I think what we're seeing now with, we talk about the space economy, Jordan mentioned it from like us being in space and living there and, doing all these things, but the space economy is much bigger than that. I think we're growing into seeing how the space industry is working. And if we think about it, what Jordan is saying is there's startup companies that we work with. NASA essentially is a business, right? It's a government entity, but it's still an organization that has a hierarchy and structure. You have like, the NASA administrator who is the CEO. And so if you look at it from a standpoint of really breaking it down from a normal business structure, we have all of the same components. You have accounting and finance, and you have legal, and you have graphic design and marketing, and all of these different, and facilities, and janitorial services, and any kind of job you can think of, you can find in the space industry. So you don't necessarily have to have a STEM background to be in space or to be in a STEM industry, right? You can learn as you go on the job. And that's how a lot of people have, done it if they haven't particularly gone and gotten a degree. But one thing that I liked, because there was a little girl, and she saw I had a jacket on, a bomber jacket, and it had a NASA patch. And she was like, I really want to work at NASA, but I can't. My brother can though, because he wants to be an engineer when he grows up. And I was like, well, what do you want to do? And she goes, well, I want to be a graphic designer. And I was like, well, look at here. Can you see this little patch right here? That's all you, boo. And so I think it's just really breaking it down to a level to where we can understand and associate with it, so that it's not so like far-fetched or unreachable or unattainable, to where it's like, oh well, space ain't for us, right? Like that. I've heard that all the time. Like, it's sorry, Rachel, space for white folks. Like, that's what they say, right? And I'm just like, no, it's not. Like, it really impacts everyone. And so
But
I think there's
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's intimidating. I think it's intimidating.
Well, it's
Absolutely.
intimidating
You
because
know,
there's a lot of uncertainty, because there's not a lot of, knowledge. Like there, that PR that we need, there needs to be more PR where we're at. Right. And that was one thing that Jordan and I talked about is, with Trish is like, okay, well, how do we get more people of color to know about Trish and to start engaging with Trish and different things? Well, you got to go to where they are. You have
Mhm.
to go to where they are so that they understand, and you can break it down in a way that they can understand it and relate to it better. And so it's really not about
yeah.
just presenting them the information, because they have the internet. Sometimes you can go on the internet and find anything that you need to, but one, you have to know where to go to look, and two,
Yep.
it has to make sense for you. And if it doesn't, you don't see anybody that looks like you don't
Right.
see anybody who's been successful that you can relate to, you're not going to think that it's for you. So I think
Right.
that that's where we have kind of like that disconnect that comes in, and where like the education and what Trish is doing with their diversity program, and really pushing for educating more people of color about how it shows up for them in their life, what they can do with it, what are some of the careers. But I mean, we're gonna need plumbers when we go. If we want to be able to flush toilets, they're gonna have to be able to understand how space is going to impact that environment. They're the experts, not us, right? Everyone has their own expertise, but I think if we broke it down to where it's like, hey, any type of job, any type of responsibility that you have, just know how it shows up or how it's going to be positioned in space. Know how microgravity is going to affect what you do. Know how, living in a space environment, in an enclosed environment, vacuum sealed environment for a long time, know how that's going to affect what you do. So just really thinking about space and bringing it back down to what we're doing here on Earth. And then even in the water, right? Underwater, water and space are kind of like, the same or complementary in a lot of the things. And so really just understanding that, I think, could allow us to really learn how we can play in this space.
Well, this is some good information here. And I think what is so, I cannot wait till my daughters see this episode, because my 6-year-old is infatuated with space. But only thing that she talks about is being an astronaut. And I think that's because that's what only thing that she knows. And then I have my 14-year-old that, I'm sorry, not my 14-year-old, my 17-year-old. Oh my goodness. My 17-year-old who is really trying to understand what she's good at in school, which is math and science, but don't really want to be an engineer. She likes the space stuff, but she's like, again, focusing on, well, this is what you need to do to be an engineer. And engineers is what goes to, deals with space. So this is great. So how can we increase diversity and representation in space science, being that, typically what we do see is not us in that space. And so how can my little girls be able to know that they can see themselves doing this?
Hey, do you wanna start, or you want me to start? Because I have a
Nah,
lot
go
of
ahead.
thoughts.
I get a little long. I can get a little bit passionate about this.
I
So
know.
I need you to
I'm
get what you
like,
got to say in.
just okay. So first of all, to your point, Shantae, like I definitely feel you on that. I mean, one of the first things that I kind of realized as soon as I started working at Trish was like, again, I don't have a scientific background. I was good at math and science in school. I mean, I was a nerd in school, so I was good at school in general. And then when I got to Rice, like they're known for engineering. My mom tried to push me into engineering, and I thought, surface level, like, okay, fine, I'm good at math enough to try it out. Immediately was like, no, this is not it. It's not going to work for me. And it was also, though, I think I had no passion for it. I didn't understand, like, yeah, already at that level. And I didn't realize it at that time. At 18 years old, it was already like, I don't see myself in this, like I wanted to do something more creative, more liberal, like whatever, I knew I loved to read. So it was like English major. That was an easy decision for me. And then just like talking to some of my peers, like my best friend, she graduated with computer science from U of H. And, she is she's a Vietnamese American female. So it's like, but, she had a really hard time figuring out what she wanted to do. And like at the time I was like, yeah, girl, I'm about to be an English major. She was freaking out and she was like, I don't know what I'm good at. Like, I don't know, you know? And I think that's something that a lot of people, particularly minorities, like you experience this because if you don't already know, if you don't already have some kind of familial ties or some kind of track to already put yourself in, most like minority people of color, we see ourselves in roles that we've already seen, right? So what? Teacher,
Yes.
doctor, lawyer, and engineer, which is so vague. Like, you know, my mom was pushing for me to be an engineer and I was like, do you even know what an engineer, like, what, can you tell me what I would be doing? Like, because it doesn't sound super glamorous to me. And like, that's not what I, you know, I can't imagine my life in something like that. And so I think, like we talk a lot about like what is the issue with diversity in space, you know, particularly. And when we were hiring Janaea and like starting to do the work and saying like, okay, we need to figure out from the perspective of underrepresented communities, what are the barriers to them finding this kind of research? Of course, what came up was it's a pipeline issue, which, you know, like we've batted around that so many times. And I think that just like with a lot of other industries in the, you know, in the world, like, yes, there's a pipeline issue because of that, right? Because we don't see ourselves in it, because we don't know enough about it, because we can't insert ourselves. We don't know what access we have into these places. And so increasing diversity is always going to be like, it's always this piece of like, we got to start them young, because it's like, it's at an alarming rate. Like I think, oh, Rachel, she would know about this, but I think it's like, there is some kind of study or statistic that's like, by 12 years old, a child has already started to kind of like divest themselves from things that they don't see themselves in, you know? And so then it just, you know, your pipeline or your idea of your career journey is narrow and narrow and narrow as you get older, you know, and you don't even realize it. So on one level, yes, it's like this, there's a need to like make these opportunities like known to people from a young age, like making sure that there's, you know, proper people been put in place, like to educate them from a very young age on how this will be applicable to their lives as they grow older. You can't just see yourself as a doctor or a, you know, an engineer in the general sense, but like, how do my skills and my experiences really tie into that? And so when I started at Trish, I remember being struck by like seeing all the things that our researchers were doing. And I was like, this is what you can do with science. Like, I still wouldn't have done it, but it would have been nice to know that this is what I could have done. And so I think that's a really key component of it, as well as like, you know, for the work that I do, like making sure that you're always thinking outside the box and really targeting these communities, not just putting out things and saying, oh, we have a solicitation out, you know, like we realized with Trish, like that's not going to work, because for the same reasons, like the people who already know about it are going to know about it. If you want to attract different people, you have to think outside the box and get, you know, like Janaea said, get into where they are. And it's not even always just putting something in front of their face and saying, hey, we have going to an HBCU and saying, hey, we're Trish, we have a solicitation open. Like when I first started doing this, there was an assistant professor at an HBCU who told me like, yeah, I've seen y'all's grants come out, and you know, I'm assistant professor at an HBCU, and one problem we have is that I see that y'all's grants require cost sharing, and our university doesn't cost share. Like I mean, you know, the cost sharing is not really a thing like that for us at our university. I don't know how to go about that. Like we don't have as many funds set aside for that. And so for a lot of the PWIs and larger institutions that we fund, that's not an issue, you know, because they budget for that thing and for those kind of things. So it's about, even on that level, it was like, okay, we need to do the work of letting people know like, hey, we have in-kind cost sharing. Like there's a lot of ways to cost share for our grants. So it's not just a monetary cash match. Like you can, you know, there's a lot of ways you can do it. You could talk with us, you know, and like, I'm not the expert on that, but you know, the people that our operations manager and our finance team, like they know different ways to cost share, and like there's ways to do it, you know? And so that's something that if you didn't know and you didn't know who to talk to about it, you probably just won't reply, because they're lengthy grants, you know, like it's not an easy task to just apply and just hope for the best.
Well, that's interesting, Jordan, because the vast majority of Black researchers and PhDs come out of HBCUs. And if, you know, the HBCU is not equipped or cannot meet the eligibility requirements of, you know, the solicitation, then you're still stuck.
Oh, that's
Right.
good.
You know, some of us go on to larger institutions once we graduate and you know, become PIs, but like the factory, the factories are Meharry and Howard.
Right.
Mostly.
Right.
That's where the majority of us come from. And so we have to find a way to make those solicitations if they're not already. I know you said there's some in-kind options and things like that, but to bridge those institutions to be able to apply, because therein lies your pipeline.
Right.
Is there.
Yeah. It's like
Not
this
to be
push.
preachy.
No, no, I mean, that's, you know, a lot of my work as a diversity lead has been like, okay, what are these hard and strict parameters? Because a lot of it has been like, okay, we thought that we had to do this, but really did we have to do it this way? You know, like we have to look at this, because if we're saying we want these sorts of people, but we're hard requiring this just because of a history of this requirement, like if there's no real reason, like of course there are some NASA constraints that we really can't get around, like as you know, as a grant organization that's funded through NASA, we do have our NASA standards that we have to just adhere to. But a lot of that is like not necessarily standard and protocol, but just you know, things, regimen, like things that we've just gotten used to, and things that like, well, it was always done this way. And that's where you have to like challenge and say, okay, do we have to require cost sharing? Or is it that we usually require cost sharing? Is there a way to get around it? Can we write a solicitation that doesn't require cost sharing? Because our solicitations, there are varying degrees depending on what solicitation is. Some of them require 10%, some of them require more. And so, you know, just things like that. Like that's the role of, well, that's my role. That's something I've tried to
It's
be.
really simple. It's like getting the equity. Like we have these conversations all the time about diversity and inclusion, right? But you know, the execution is what matters. And to execute, you have to get to a place of equity. And equity is not just giving minority institutions access to apply. And it's not just a communication campaign to drive awareness. Equity is also providing the tools to help those institutions get to a place where they can actually, you know, apply. And that requires an investment, and it's going to require help.
Yep.
You can't do it alone.
Yep. That's
Wow,
exactly why we have our partnership solicitation out.
This is a great conversation. So I have one more question. So what's next in space exploration? What's next?
Well, I guess I can answer. It's so many things that are coming up. So I recently got accepted into ASU's Thunderbird School of Global Management. I haven't announced it yet. So
Breaking news!
Congratulations!
It's just between us. Don't worry about it.
But yeah, so they have getting a master's in global management with a specialization in space leadership, business, and policy. A lot of that question that you asked, we are literally learning about all of the new things, the crazy ideas that are coming. We're talking about, obviously, Elon Musk has been talking about creating, you know, inhabiting Mars or inhabiting another planet. I'm not going to say colonizing because we need to remove that verbiage from.
Want to go there?
But yeah, so there's a lot of different things that are going to now have to look at how space will relate to that. So a lot of things that we're using today, like, okay, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, robotics, a lot of the things that we've already seen that are, happening in this fourth industrial revolution are here. But now it's like escalated now even further, because now, okay, what does that look like for space? What does cybersecurity look like in space? How are we using artificial intelligence to allow us to get some of the data, the satellites that are being sent up? I know Elon Musk actually sent out a Starlink to Ukraine because they, Russia was trying to get rid of their Wi-Fi or something like that. So it's a lot of these different innovations that are coming into play that is going to actually help the world and level the playing field. And going back to your equity piece, Mala, is really about like, okay, how do we not only give people access to these things, but level the playing field so that they don't necessarily need to have any barriers that exist. So now we're on a level playing field. They have the access they need. They have the resources and the tools. And now all they have to do is go out and execute, and we can help and support them with that as well. But I think what we'll start to see is, because space tourism is going to be, it's not going to be, it is a thing, right? Virgin Galactic has already sold, I want to say like 4,000 seats at like 200,000 a pop. I said, oh, so y'all making money. Like that is you want to talk about a new space economy. That is definitely the thing. They're talking about putting an orbital reef up there. There's already been designs out for what a private commercial space station will look like. And so I could only assume that there will be hotels, there will be, the orbital reef is like a whole park where you can just go up and like, and be in space. And so we may not be inhabiting another planet very, in the near future. But we will be there to where it is something that is entertainment. Maybe we're taking vacations or different things like that. And to go back to what Jordan is talking about, now we really need to be looking at, because we're sending regular people into space, not these high performing peak, healthy individuals. There may be people that, have chronic conditions and may not even know until they get there. Because the space environment may be different, right? And so we don't even know what that looks like. And so if we want to make sure that space is going to be representative of what the Earth looks like, we need to have everybody making sure that they're a part of the development of what that looks like. Otherwise, we'll be left behind. We'll still be, I always say we don't want to be on another planet still begging for diversity, equity, inclusion. But at this point, we don't know how it's going to impact us. I know that one thing that I read a long time ago that I didn't know. So Henrietta Lacks cells actually went to space. And so they were doing experiments on that to see like, okay, well, how will space actually affect? Girl, I already know where you're coming from. But yes, so having different types of people actually go to space and understand the impacts of the space environment, I think is going to be critical in terms of making sure that we are a part of what this new space economy looks like, that we don't, get left behind. And I mean, I don't even I don't know what that looks like, but I know there's a lot of different new things that are coming out. And so I hope that answers your question.
It does. And listen, this has been an education, not just for our viewers, but for us as well, around the importance. I mean, I feel like I'm leaving this episode a bit more woke. I'm a bit more woke. I thought I was woke, but clearly I've been sleeping on some things. And so, we appreciate you taking the time, because this conversation is so, so, so important. And like Shantae, I can't wait to show it to my daughters, because I have 3.
Yeah.
I have 3. And, in the same way that my mom wanted to expose me to things she had never seen, as a Black woman growing up in Mississippi and Chicago, I want to expose my girls to things that I, even as a scientist, really never really gave a lot of thought to. So thank you for that gift, because this really was a gift. to us as well as the community. And I wish you all much success on your mission to improve diversity and inclusion in this space. Hope to have you back at some point. Viewers, thank you so much for watching this episode. Until next time, we'll see you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Deep flows like a breeze flowing through me, from my head to my feet. Your love runs smooth, ooh, it soothes, and you're making life right. I'm so glad that you're mine, you're mine.